For Radio VR in Washington, I'm Kate Zickel. Well, there have been a lot of new developments in Ukraine since yesterday. Former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych has given a speech that seems to be relatively important to the situation going on over there. There has been an airport that has been taken over in Crimea, and then there have been increased reports of military drills in Russia. Joining us now to comment on the situation is our Radio VR commentator, Dmitry Babich. Dmitry, thanks for joining me.
Yes, nice to hear from you.
So, Dmitry, there's so much to talk about today, but I really want to start with Yanukovych's speech. We heard it broadcast earlier this morning on our own airwaves, but I wanted to get your thoughts on what was said and what it means for Ukraine.
Well, it wasn't actually a speech. He just replied to the questions from the reporters. It was a press conference, basically. And what was interesting was that it had been announced in advance. So since the early morning, we knew he would answer the questions of reporters. And I think it was an interesting press conference, although he didn't say anything that would contradict what he had said before. He basically said that he was not toppled legally, but he left the country because of a threat to his security and to the security of his family. He said that, the so-called protesters shot at his car, at his convoy in Kharkiv, that even his grandson, a small grandson who is now at kindergarten, was included in the list, in the black list of people who are now in power in Ukraine. So he basically said that parliament, which is now controlled by the Maidan protesters, that this parliament is illegitimate. All the laws that it is passing, that it is going to pass, are illegitimate because they don't have the signature of the president. The president is still alive. He was just forced to leave the country. And
but
he basically described
anymore.
Everything that, he described what happened as a fascist takeover of power by a small group, or what he described extremely extremist nationalist fascist groups, which represent a small minority of Ukrainians. This is a big question. Is he president or not? Because legally there is a special procedure that must be fulfilled in order to remove the president. Just like in the United States, there is impeachment, which is a legal procedure. The same thing in Ukraine, and it was never fulfilled by the new forces that control the Rada. So legally speaking, Yanukovych may claim to be the president. We understand that he doesn't have real power anymore.
No, he doesn't. Alexander Turchnov is the new interim president of the Ukraine currently.
Well, that's what he says. But legally speaking, Alexander Turchinov has no right to be the interim president because there was no impeachment of the previous president. And the procedure was not fulfilled at all. I mean, the whole thing is illegal because this agreement between Yanukovych and the opposition that was signed and guaranteed just on paper by the EU, the three foreign ministers of EU countries, it was not fulfilled. So the whole thing is absolutely outside the framework of the law. That's the problem.
Well, Dmitry, we do need to move on here, but I did want to ask you briefly, Yanukovych's future plans here. Did he mention anything in his speech regarding where he's planning to go now, or did he say anything about asking Russia for asylum?
Well, he said that he talked to Putin on the phone, that he has not yet met Putin personally. He said that he had to flee Ukraine. He described what happened after he disappeared from the public radar. He said that his helicopter was intercepted by fighter planes. It was forced to land near Kharkov. So he took a car and he crossed the border by car. He said that he will stay in Rostov, which is a city in the south of Russia where he gave that press conference. He's going to stay in Rostov and not in Moscow, because he has friends in Rostov who agreed to give him room and board. And he said that he didn't give the order for the policemen to fire. He said that the policemen started to fire only when they were directly threatened by the protesters and when protesters themselves started to use fire weapons. So he also explained why he postponed the signing of the association agreement with the European Union. He said it was for economic reasons, because it would ruin Ukrainian industry and especially agriculture. So these are the new things, things that we haven't heard from him before. The other things are more or less the same that he said when he was still in power.
Well, Dmitry, I do want to get on to talking about the airport in Crimea. There's been a takeover of the airport over there by armed men. We don't necessarily know who they are right now, but there has been...
No, we know already.
Oh, really?
We know already. The latest news is that these people, they are not Russian soldiers, as the new Ukrainian government suspected. These are the self-defense forces of Crimea, I would say a sort of militia. And the reason why they're at the airport continues to operate as usual. They want to check the comings and goings of military personnel at the airport because they're afraid that Kiev might send special police units or army to Crimea to subdue it. So this is the reason why they took control of the airport. And it turned out that the local government, the Crimean government, asked them to do it.
Well, according to Ukraine's interior minister, he has apparently charged Russian troops with taking control of the two main airports in Crimea. Have we...
Well, this is the problem. Yeah, this is the problem we have now in Ukraine, because this situation is absolutely, as I said, out of the framework of the law. We have conflicting views on everything, because the new government that was formed yesterday in Ukraine consists of extremely nationalist elements. All of the people, almost all the members of the government, are actually from the same region in the west of Ukraine, from Lvov, the one that used to be outside the Russian Empire and where, the most hardcore Ukrainian nationalists live. And Crimea and other regions of Ukraine, especially in the Russian-speaking south and in the Russian-speaking east, they're afraid that these people might send police or other kind of armed formations to subdue them, to destroy their autonomy. So I would not give credence to everything that now comes from Kiev or from Crimea. These are clearly parties at conflict. And in this situation, I would say that we should listen to both parties, but I would not give credence to the words of the Ukrainian interior minister that he knows these are Russian troops. Russia made it very clear that its troops in Crimea, they are there legally according to an agreement that had been signed back in the 90s. They're at their base in Sebastopol. And none of them took part in safeguarding the airports.
Well, Dmitry, there have been some new reports as the United States has urged Russia to avoid provocative actions after President Putin ordered troops to conduct combat readiness drills near Ukraine. And since then, we've seen a few reports coming out of the news, at least here, regarding additional military drills that have been taking place in Russia. Do you know anything about whether or not that is a valid statement that we are hearing come out?
Well, of course, the Western press is now trying to create an impression that Russia is pressuring Ukraine, that Russia is, being unhappy with the developments that took place in January and in February. Well, indeed, it's very hard not to be unhappy about it because so many people died, and obviously the situation is out of the framework of the law. So the Western press is trying to create that impression that Russia is doing something belligerent. But just today, our foreign minister called his American colleague, and he explained that these military exercises, they had been planned many months ago. They are not necessarily near the Ukrainian border. They are all over Russia. And, I have been writing about Russia and Ukraine for 25 years. I don't believe in a real military conflict. I think it's absolutely excluded. The problem is that, Ukraine was put before a choice it didn't want to make, either Russia or the European Union. And this is a choice that Ukraine just can't make because without Russia, Ukraine is bankrupt. Without the European Union, Ukraine is deprived of its dream. So it's very unfortunate that instead of helping Ukraine to develop itself, the EU and Russia failed to agree on a common cause on Ukraine. And Yanukovych, in his press conference today, it was very interesting what he had to say. He basically supported Crimea. He said that I understand why Crimea doesn't want to be controlled by this nationalist gang that now rules in Kiev. Okay, he used strong language, but that's what he said.
Right.
But on the other hand, of course, the Crimean government, in their statement yesterday and again today, they said that they don't want to leave Ukraine, They want to be part of Ukraine, but with their own autonomous rights and with the right to speak Russian and to teach Russian at schools on their territory. This is the most difficult point, which language is going to be used at schools.
Yeah, that's been an area of contention over the last couple of weeks and has been discussed multiple times, both here and in Russia. Dmitry, we are out of time, but thank you again for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time. That's Dmitry Babich. He is our radio VR commentator in Moscow, joining us to talk about the latest updates from Ukraine. Dmitry, thanks again. And for Radio VR in Washington, I'm Kate Zickel.